The world moves differently now. A tap on a screen, a car at your door, a journey that feels effortless. For millions, Uber is not just an app, it is a revolution. A symbol of freedom, flexibility, and convenience. But behind the glow of innovation lies a shadow, a story of exploitation, survival, and hidden truths that few passengers ever see. This is the paradox of progress. Technology promises empowerment, but often delivers control. Uber tells its drivers they are partners, entrepreneurs, free to choose their destiny. Yet many find themselves trapped in cycles of debt, exhaustion, and insecurity. The company sells safety, but scandals reveal vulnerability. It claims sustainability, but studies show rising emissions. It thrives, not on profit, but on belief. Tonight, we peel back the layers of the ride-hailing giant. We will uncover the untold truths behind Uber's rise, its battles, and its contradictions. From the streets of New York to the protests of Paris, from the alleys of Nairobi to the boardrooms of Silicon Valley, this is not just the story of a company. It is the story of the future of work, the fragility of trust, and the price we may pay for convenience. We begin with a promise, the promise of empowerment. A promise that drew millions of drivers into Uber's orbit. A promise that reshaped cities and challenged governments. A promise that may be less about. The dawn of the gig economy began with a promise of freedom, flexibility, and empowerment. Uber stood at the center of that promise, reshaping how cities move and how people work. To millions, it felt like progress, a ride at the tap of a button, a chance to earn on your own terms, a symbol of innovation. But beneath the surface, the story is far more complicated. Uber's rise is not just about technology, it is about power. Power over drivers, power over passengers, power over cities. The company presents itself as a savior of convenience. But its empire is built on contradictions. It sells empowerment, yet leaves workers without protections. It markets safety, yet scandals reveal vulnerability. It claims sustainability, yet studies show rising emissions. And, financially, it survives not on profit, but on belief. This documentary is not about rides. It is about the hidden truths behind them. We will travel from the streets of New York to the protests of Paris, from the alleys of Nairobi to the boardrooms of Silicon Valley. We will uncover the battles Uber fought against regulators, the struggles drivers face every day, the illusions of technology, and the paradox of sustainability. Each chapter reveals a piece of the puzzle, a puzzle that shows Uber not just as a company, but as a mirror of the future we are building. The dawn of Uber's story is the dawn of a new kind of labor, a labor managed by algorithms, stripped of protections, and sold as freedom. It is the dawn of a new kind of city, where convenience reshapes streets and disrupts traditions. And it is the dawn of a new kind of belief, belief in technology, belief in disruption, belief in progress, even when the costs are hidden. Tonight, we begin with the promise of empowerment, a promise that drew millions of drivers into Uber's orbit, a promise that reshaped economies and challenged governments, a promise that may be less about freedom and more about illusion. Uber's story begins with a promise of freedom, a promise of empowerment, a promise that anyone, anywhere, could become their own boss. Drive when you want, earn what you need, live free from the constraints of traditional work. It was a dream that drew millions of drivers into Uber's orbit, but dreams often look different in reality. For many drivers, the first days felt liberating. The app was simple, the rides came quickly, and the money seemed good. But soon, the cracks began to show. Pay rates fluctuated. Bonuses disappeared. Expenses piled up: gas, maintenance, insurance. What looked like independence became a struggle for survival. Studies revealed that after costs, many drivers earned less than minimum wage. The promise of freedom became the reality of insecurity. Uber calls its drivers partners, but in practice, they are contractors without protections, no health insurance, no paid leave, no retirement. When accidents happen, when illness strikes, drivers are left alone. The company that sells empowerment avoids responsibility, shifting risk onto the very people who power its empire. And then there is the algorithm. Invisible, silent, always watching. It decides when rides appear, how much they pay, and where drivers go. Surge pricing, hidden destinations, sudden changes, all controlled by code. Drivers may feel independent, but in reality, they are managed by software. The boss is not a person, but an algorithm. This is the paradox. Uber sells freedom, but delivers dependency. Drivers depend on Uber for income, yet Uber avoids accountability. The company markets empowerment, but its system creates vulnerability. The dream of being your own boss becomes the reality of being controlled by a machine. The hidden truth is that Uber's greatest innovation may not be its app, but its narrative. By convincing drivers they are free, Uber masks the exploitation beneath. The question we must ask is simple. Is empowerment real if it comes without security? Uber calls its drivers partners. It tells them they are free, flexible, empowered. But in reality, they are workers without rights, no health insurance, no paid leave, no retirement, no safety net. The gig economy promises freedom, but delivers insecurity. Traditional jobs come with protections, unions, benefits, contracts. Uber dismantles these structures by classifying drivers as independent contractors. This legal loophole saves the company billions, but leaves drivers exposed. When accidents happen, when illness strikes, when income collapses, Uber is not responsible. The risk is shifted entirely onto the worker. Technology is the new boss. The app decides who gets rides, how much they earn, and whether they stay on the platform. Drivers are rated by passengers, monitored by GPS, and managed by algorithms. A single low rating can mean deactivation. A single complaint can end a livelihood. The freedom Uber sells is controlled by invisible code. And yet drivers fight back. Across the world, protests erupt from New York to London, Nairobi to Delhi. Drivers demand recognition, fair wages, and benefits. They call for unionization, for laws that protect gig workers. Uber responds with lobbying, lawsuits, and promises of reform. The battle between workers and algorithms becomes the defining struggle of the gig economy. This is the emotional core of Uber's hidden truth. The company markets empowerment, but its system creates vulnerability. Drivers are caught in a paradox, free to choose when to work, but powerless to control how they are treated. The app gives them opportunity, but takes away security. The gig economy is not just a new way to work, it is a new way to control. The question we must ask is simple. Is technology liberating workers, or is it enslaving them in a system where freedom is only an illusion? Uber's rise was not gentle. It was aggressive, calculated, and relentless. From San Francisco to Sao Paulo, from London to Lagos, Uber entered cities like a storm, often without permission, often against the law. Its strategy was simple: grow fast, overwhelm regulators, and make itself too big to ban. When Uber launched in a new city, it rarely waited for approval. Instead, it flooded the streets with drivers, built demand among riders, and dared governments to stop it. By the time regulators reacted, Uber had already become part of daily life. The company framed itself as innovation, while critics called it invasion. Behind the scenes, Uber used secret tools to evade authorities. One of the most infamous was Greyball software, designed to identify regulators and deny them rides, making enforcement nearly impossible. Uber's tactics blurred the line between disruption and deception, raising questions about whether innovation justified breaking the rules. The battles were fierce. In Paris, taxi drivers blocked streets in protest. In London, regulators threatened bans. In India, Uber faced accusations of ignoring safety laws. In the United States, city councils fought to impose restrictions, while Uber lobbied aggressively to rewrite the rules in its favor. Each confrontation revealed the company's strategy: push boundaries, fight regulators, and win through sheer momentum. This aggressive expansion was not just about rides. It was about power. Uber positioned itself as inevitable, convincing cities that resistance was futile. But the cost was conflict, legal battles, protests, and a growing reputation as a company that thrived on confrontation rather than cooperation. The hidden truth is that Uber's success was built not only on technology, but on defiance. It forced its way into markets, reshaped laws, and challenged governments. The question is not whether Uber disrupted transportation, but whether it undermined the very systems meant to protect workers, passengers, and cities. Uber sells itself as safe, reliable, and convenient. A ride at the tap of a button, tracked by GPS, rated by passengers, monitored by technology. To millions, it feels like security in motion. But beneath the polished image lies a troubling reality: safety scandals, hidden risks, and a company struggling to protect both riders and drivers. Reports of assaults, harassment, and violence have haunted Uber since its rise. Passengers have faced attacks from drivers, and drivers have faced danger from passengers. Investigations reveal thousands of incidents worldwide, many hidden behind settlements and silence. Uber's promise of safety often collapses in the face of human vulnerability. The company's response has been technology. Panic buttons, GPS tracking, ride-sharing with friends, background checks. Uber argues that its app makes rides safer than traditional taxis. But critics warn that technology cannot replace accountability. Background checks miss red flags. Panic buttons are useless if help arrives too late. Safety features create the illusion of protection, while risks remain. And then there is trust. Uber's reputation depends on passengers believing they are secure, yet scandals from data breaches to cover-ups erode confidence. In 2016, Uber concealed a massive hack that exposed the data of millions of riders and drivers. The company paid hackers to keep quiet, hiding the truth from the public. Trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. Drivers, too, face danger. Long hours, late nights, and unpredictable passengers put them at risk. Assaults, robberies, and accidents are part of the hidden cost of driving for Uber. The company's promise of empowerment often leaves drivers exposed, with little support when things go wrong. This is the paradox of Uber's safety narrative. Technology creates the illusion of control, but human lives remain vulnerable. The app may track your ride, but it cannot guarantee your security. Uber sells trust, but struggles to earn it. The question is not whether Uber is safer than taxis, but whether it is truly safe at all. Uber is everywhere. Millions of rides every day, billions in revenue. To the casual observer, it looks unstoppable. But the hidden truth is that Uber has rarely been profitable. Behind the convenience lies a company that survives not on earnings, but on belief. From its earliest days, Uber burned through cash at an extraordinary rate, subsidizing rides, paying driver incentives, expanding into new markets, all cost billions. The company's strategy was simple: grow fast, dominate cities, and worry about profit later. Investors poured in money, convinced that Uber was not just a ride-hailing app, but the future of transportation itself. Yet, year after year, Uber reported losses. Billions vanished, even as rides increased. The company depended on venture capital, stock sales, and hype to stay alive. Its valuation soared, not because of profits, but because of promises of self-driving cars, flying taxis, and global dominance. Uber sold not just rides, but the idea of inevitability. This financial paradox is striking. Traditional taxi companies survive on fares. Uber survives on faith. Investors treat it like a tech startup, valuing potential over reality. The company's empire rests on the belief that one day, somehow, it will turn the corner. But critics warn that Uber's model is unsustainable, that cheap rides are only possible because someone else is paying the difference. And then there are the risky bets. Uber invested heavily in self-driving technology, burning billions with little return. It expanded into food delivery, freight, and even flying cars. Each venture promised salvation, but most delivered losses. The company's survival has depended on constant reinvention, constant hype, and constant belief. The hidden truth is that Uber's financial survival is fragile. It thrives not on stability, but on risk. It sells not just rides, but the dream of disruption. The question is not whether Uber can grow, but whether it can ever truly sustain itself without the endless fuel of investor faith. Uber is not just an app. It is a force that reshapes cities. From San Francisco to Sao Paulo, from London to Lagos, Uber's arrival changes how people move, how governments regulate, and how local economies survive. But the impact is not the same everywhere. In some places, Uber is seen as progress. In others, it is seen as invasion. In Europe, taxi unions fought back. Protests erupted in Paris and London, with drivers blocking streets and demanding fairness. Regulators imposed strict rules, forcing Uber to adapt or retreat. In Asia, Uber clashed with local giants like Didi in China and Ola in India, losing ground in some markets while struggling to survive in others. In Africa and Latin America, Uber promised opportunity, but drivers often faced violence, debt, and unstable incomes. Uber's global expansion reveals a paradox. The company sells the same story everywhere: freedom, flexibility, innovation. But the reality depends on context. In wealthy cities, Uber is convenience. In poorer regions, it is survival. In some countries, it empowers riders with affordable transport. In others, it destabilizes local industries and sparks conflict. And then there is the cultural clash. Uber's model assumes universal rules, but local traditions resist. In places where taxis are tightly regulated, Uber is seen as illegal. In regions where informal transport thrives, Uber struggles to compete. The company's aggressive expansion often ignores cultural nuance, forcing its way into markets rather than adapting to them. This is the hidden truth of Uber's global impact. It is not just a company but a disruptor of systems. It changes how cities function, how workers survive, and how governments respond. The question is not whether Uber is successful worldwide, but whether its success comes at the cost of stability, fairness, and trust. Uber insists it is not a transportation company, but a technology company. It promises innovation, fleets of self-driving cars, artificial intelligence optimizing every ride, even visions of flying taxis. To investors, this is the future. To consumers, it feels like progress. But the hidden truth is that Uber's technology often exists more in marketing than in reality. Take self-driving cars. Uber poured billions into autonomous vehicle research, promising to eliminate labor costs and revolutionize transport. But after years of testing, accidents, and lawsuits, the project collapsed. A fatal crash in Arizona exposed the dangers, and Uber quietly sold off its self-driving division. The dream of automation became the reality of human tragedy. Or consider Uber's algorithms. The company claims its AI reduces wait times and improves safety, but for drivers, the algorithm is a silent master. It decides who gets rides, how much they earn, and whether they stay on the platform. Surge pricing, ratings, and deactivations are all controlled by invisible code. Technology becomes less a tool of empowerment and more a system of control. Uber also promised flying taxis, futuristic visions of urban air mobility. Slick videos showed drones carrying passengers across cities. Investors saw salvation. But the reality was prototypes, delays, and eventual abandonment. The dream of flying cars was less about engineering and more about keeping belief alive. And then there is data. Every Uber ride generates information: where you go, when you travel, how you move. Uber collects it all, building maps of human behavior. The company argues this data improves efficiency, but critics warn it creates surveillance, giving Uber unprecedented insight into cities and individuals. Technology that promises convenience also creates dependency and vulnerability. This is the tech illusion. Uber sells innovation, but delivers control. It markets the future, but thrives on hype. It promises freedom, but builds systems of surveillance. The question is not whether Uber is a tech company, but whether its technology serves progress or simply serves power. Uber presents itself as part of the solution by reducing the need for private car ownership, by pooling rides, by promising efficiency. It claims to cut emissions and ease congestion. To many, Uber feels like progress, a cleaner, smarter way to move. But the hidden truth is that Uber's impact on the environment is far more complicated. Studies show that ride-hailing often increases traffic, not reduces it. Cars circle while waiting for rides, adding miles and emissions. Passengers who might have taken buses, trains, or walked instead choose Uber, shifting trips from low-carbon options to higher-carbon ones. The promise of sustainability becomes the reality of more cars on the road. Uberpool, the company's carpooling feature, was marketed as a green solution, but adoption has been limited, and in many cities, it failed to reduce congestion. The dream of shared rides often collapsed into individual trips, multiplying emissions instead of cutting them. And then there is the life cycle cost. Uber's model depends on drivers using their own cars, often older vehicles with lower fuel efficiency. Unlike electric fleets, these cars emit more per mile. The company's sustainability narrative ignores the hidden footprint of millions of individual vehicles, each contributing to pollution. Uber argues that it is investing in electric vehicles, partnerships with charging networks, and incentives for green driving. But critics warn that progress is slow, and the company's reliance on fossil fuel cars remains overwhelming. The sustainability paradox is clear. Uber markets itself as a cleaner alternative, but its system often creates more emissions, not less. This is the hidden truth. Uber's green promise is not absolute. It is conditional, dependent on adoption of electric cars, on shared rides, on systemic change that has yet to arrive. The question is not whether Uber is cleaner than taxis, but whether it is truly sustainable, or simply another form of greenwashing, selling hope while hiding the cost. Uber is more than an app. It is a mirror reflecting the promises and contradictions of our time. It sells freedom, but delivers dependency. It markets empowerment, but hides exploitation. It promises safety, but struggles with trust. It claims sustainability, but often increases emissions. It thrives not on profit, but on belief. This is the paradox of progress. Technology reshapes our lives, but not always in the ways we expect. Uber shows us the future of work, flexible but fragile. The future of cities, connected but congested. The future of innovation, dazzling but often illusion. It forces us to ask whether convenience is worth the cost, and whether disruption is truly progress. The hidden truth is not that Uber is good or bad. It is that progress is never clean. Every ride carries a story of a driver struggling to survive, of a passenger trusting an app, of a city adapting to disruption. Uber is not just a company. It is a symbol of the choices we make, the risks we accept, and the futures we build. As consumers, we must look deeper, behind the marketing, beyond the convenience, into the systems that shape our lives. Because the future of work, of transport, of technology, will be decided not just by companies like Uber, but by the questions we ask, the accountability we demand, and the values we refuse to compromise. The brightest lights cast the longest shadows, and Uber's shadow is one we cannot ignore. Uber began with a promise: freedom, flexibility, innovation. It became a global empire, reshaping cities, redefining work, and changing how millions move. But as we've uncovered, that promise carries shadows, exploitation hidden behind empowerment, safety compromised by convenience, sustainability undermined by reality, and survival built not on profit, but on belief. Uber is not just a company. It is a symbol of the future we are building. A future where technology manages workers, where convenience outweighs fairness, where disruption is celebrated even when its costs are hidden. It forces us to ask, are we buying progress or are we buying illusion? The hidden truth is that Uber reflects us, our hunger for speed, our willingness to overlook costs, our desire to belong to the winning future. The brightest lights cast the longest shadows, and Uber's shadow stretches across the world. If this documentary challenged your assumptions, carry that skepticism with you. Look beyond the marketing. Question the systems. Demand accountability. Because the future of work, of transport, of technology will be decided not just by companies like Uber, but by the questions we ask today. The story of Uber is not finished. It is still being written in every ride, every protest, every law passed, every promise made. The question is not whether Uber will survive, but whether we will allow its model to define the future of labor, technology, and trust. Thank you for watching. If this exposé opened your eyes, share it with someone who rides, drives, or believes in the gig economy. Subscribe for more investigations into the brands shaping our lives. Stay curious, stay critical, and remember, progress without accountability is just another illusion.